This is Brian Campbell, and you're watching Rough Draft Recordings. I grew up in West Africa and the United States. This past December, I had the privilege of camping in one of Africa's best preserved rainforests, the Faunal Reserve in southeastern Cameroon. 90% of the reserve is untouched by human civilization, while the other 10% is used for hunting and farming by the Baka, a local ethnic group which has chosen to remain largely primitive in the face of modernity. While the reserve is rich in biodiversity, it is underdeveloped for tourism, which means you never quite know what to expect when you venture inside. I've visited several awesome places as an adult. Italy was the most relaxing, Senegal was the most nostalgic, and Iceland was the most inspiring, but none of those trips were quite as unique as this one. After all, I saw an ngeke. As the old saying goes, the journey is as important as the destination. My trip started with a 5-hour bus ride to a town named Abongbong. The ride was air-conditioned and pleasant, punctuated by a beautiful view of the Nyang River, which I'd canoed several months ago, and logging trucks that I hoped we wouldn't crash into. Logging is a huge industry in the eastern region, and you can see plenty of logging trucks on this road on Google Earth. Things got pretty interesting when we arrived at the bus station, where I met Etienne, a local that has trained his German Shepherd to ride on his moto with him. African ingenuity at its finest. Mr. Abbott, another missionary, picked me up and we headed south to the Baka village where he lives. It was getting dark and the dry season brought cloud after cloud of bright red sand. If the dust clouds were bad enough, we rolled up our windows. It was eerily beautiful, and I felt like I was at the end of the world. Maybe I can give you an idea of how it felt.
This is the end, beautiful friend.
Sorry, I just had to. It was a pretty cool ride. We turned down a bumpy driveway to get to the Abbott's village. Their house was very cozy, with a gas stove and solar-powered electricity, and they even installed their own ceiling fans. We woke up early, drank our morning coffee, and were on the road by 5:30, heading for a town named Lomé. We passed the Baka locals in the early sunshine as they headed out to hunt. Mr. Abbott showed me where his family used to give swimming lessons, and we passed through village after village after village. This is a pretty relaxing video, but don't be fooled. The road was one of the bumpiest roads I have ever been on. We picked up our guide in a small town named Minduru, and Mr. Abbott had to secure the spare tire on the roof. The ratchet strap had gotten loose. After crossing several rivers, we got to Lomé around 8, and we were greeted by cows. You don't see that a lot in Yaoundé. We checked in at the park office, which had a power outage, and waited for the staff to make arrangements. Several hours later, we hired 5 motos to drive us to the park entrance. We arrived with 6. We were in a small village, and we waited under these trees for another hour while our crew came. We ended up with our tour guide, our local guide, 2 teenage porters, and 3 very happy armed soldiers. The park is government land. The guns are mandatory for protection from wildlife and potential poachers. In a moment's notice, we were headed into the forest. On this path here, barely a foot wide. Within an hour, we were in the thick of it, bushwhacking through miles and miles of undisturbed foliage. I've never been further from society in my life.
The clock says it's time to close now. I guess I better go now.
After trekking for an hour and a half, we saw a splash in a stream that stopped us dead in our tracks. We had just spotted an ngeke. The only thing left to do was hunt it. At this moment, I realized just how crazy our situation was. Ngeke is the Baka word for jungle cobra, which is one of the deadliest snakes in all of Africa. There were no roads, and the trees were too thick for helicopters. We were completely alone, face to face with a cobra. After our run-in with our new friend, we hiked a bit farther to a random bend in the path. Our guide hacked away with his machete, and in about 20 minutes we had ourselves a cozy little campsite. Our guide started a blazing hot fire with nothing but sticks, trash, and a lighter. It was time for a fascinating cultural experience, making dinner from scratch. Tonight's meal was fufu, or couscous, as the locals call it. First, they boiled canned anchovies with gumbo and spices to make a sauce. After that, they took a second marmie and started boiling manioc flour and corn flour, which they had packed in plastic grocery bags. Most of our cooking supplies and food were packed in a traditional Baka backpack, hand-woven from sticks and vines. Once the flour was boiling, they whittled a fufu stick and began stirring until it had a thick, doughy consistency. Lastly, the cook rolled out large balls of dough, put it on plates, and poured the gumbo sauce over it. And voila, my fufu was ready. Yum! Our conversation that evening consisted of arguments over the price of street-side monkey meat and Bob Marley, our chef's favorite musician. I picked the song for him. But our meal wasn't over yet. Remember our new friend? Soon after I started eating my fufu, they threw the whole cobra on the fire to fry its meat and skin. After that, they sliced it down the belly, gutted it, chopped it into bits, and tossed it in boiling water.
The greatest man alive. But now I'm a man. Way past 21.
As you can see, it was pitch black before they'd finished the cobra with rice, which was a little freaky, considering where we were and what we were cooking. Eventually, they served the snake, and it was well worth the wait. I went to sleep full of starch and snake, chuckling at what I'd gotten myself into. After a calm night of mild indigestion, I woke up to the sounds and sights of morning breakfast. Some of the guys slept on nothing but a mat on the open ground beside my tent. I freshened up in the river and couldn't help but admire the scenery. Mr. Abbott and I had a pleasant conversation about Russian literature as we sipped cowboy coffee, and the soldiers brushed the flies off their hanging clothes. We had spaghetti for breakfast, which our tour guide informed us wasn't authentic because we split the noodles in half. A very un-Italian thing to do. We were on the trail by 10 a.m., ready for a full day in the forest. The second day was much less eventful than the first, but was still full of quirky and memorable experiences. We made it to the official entrance of the park, where the soldiers were eager to get their pictures taken. Now that I was quite comfortable in our hiking routine, I started to really notice the various species of plants, trees, and vines. But our fearless party had to keep us on our toes. Mr. Abbott and I started to notice two things. First, they were arguing about where we were going. And second, they liked to take sitting breaks. A lot. On our first break, one of the guys asked Mr. Abbott if he had spare batteries for his satellite phone. Mr. Abbott said he didn't have any. I'm not sure how that situation shook out, but clearly we made it out alive, so there you go. It became pretty evident that even though they knew where they were going, they hadn't decided how we were going to get out yet. Soon after we were back on our feet, our guide started scraping a tree with his machete. Everyone seemed deeply invested in the spectacle. Turns out, the Baka people use different types of tree bark for various medicinal purposes. This bark helps prevent malaria. So what do you think we did 20 minutes later? We sat down again while our guide brewed up a bunch of medicines for the boys. Turns out, he was a pretty cool dude. We were sitting at a fork in the path, which happened to be one of the things they were arguing about earlier. They were trying to decide if we should turn left or keep going straight. They called it the carrefour, which means intersection in French. This made me laugh, because carrefour makes me think of the crazy streets of cities like Tokyo or Addis Ababa. But no, they were arguing over this piddly little thing. We were all exhausted when we set up camp that night. We went monkey hunting in the twilight, and while we heard some, we never saw any. We did see plenty of caterpillars though. They were everywhere. We ate pasta and bâton de manioc, a village staple that tastes like dirt. You love it or you hate it. Oddly enough, I like it. The next morning I felt like my back was crooked as a crowbar. We ate plantain chips for breakfast, which helped me feel better. No doubt because their unique taste stimulates your taste buds and will carry you through a culinary journey into the depths of equatorial Africa. We paid the armed soldiers and started our trek out of the forest. It was pleasantly cool, and we were all buddies by now, enjoying each other's company. Well, almost. Our tourist guide kept asking our local guide how many kilometers we had left to walk, and he kept making up numbers. Eventually he said he had no idea. He just walked till he got places. We also got lost in a peanut field, so that kinda made the tourist guide mad. A few times we ran into local Bakas, who are on their way to go fishing. They are the only people allowed in the forest without soldiers, as long as they're out by sundown. But after an hour of hiking, things took a crazy, unexpected turn. Right when I lifted my foot to step over a root, our guide waved his hand in the air, commanding us to hide in the bushes, just like that one scene in Forrest Gump. Unfortunately, this is the part of the story where I admit my phone had just died, and I forgot my battery bank in the Land Cruiser. So instead of footage, I'll make a terrible animation. I couldn't see anything for about a minute, but I heard a lot of shouting. We got up and saw two grumpy-looking guys. It wouldn't be such a big deal, except one of them had a gun, and the other guy had a military jacket on that he claimed was a gift from his brother. Our conclusion? They were probably poachers. Of course, they had other stories. After handing over their gun and machete, they put their hands on their heads and joined our merry little party. Now, to their credit, these guys were pretty creative with their attempts to get out of trouble. First, the taller guy decided to share some homebrewed palm wine with us out of the goodness of his heart. That didn't work. Then they knelt down on their knees, begging for mercy. That didn't work either. The tall guy decided to put his thespian skills to the test by falling over and bemoaning how drunk he was. I think he forgot how straight he'd been walking the last 10 minutes. When that didn't work, they tried the waterworks experiment. They fell down and started crying, and told us to leave them there to die. Our guard said that was fine. He just needed to take their picture first. They felt fine after that. For the next 20 minutes, they complained about everything in existence. And then we saw the edge of the forest, which was blocked in by a giant river. We started crossing the bridge. All of a sudden, they stopped walking on the bridge. Over the water. Mr. Abbott looked back at me as if to say, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" And then, the short guy jumped. He floated away, free as Andy Dufresne. He said he fell, but our guard said he jumped. We'll let you decide. And thus, our tales from the far side of Dja are over. We thought we were back in Lomé because we could see buildings, but it turns out we still had quite a ways to walk along this path. We made it back to the main road, several miles south of where we entered. I would say we walked about 20 miles in total. We stopped at a restaurant to catch some motos back to the Land Cruiser. We said our goodbyes, and the local guide gave me these really cool seeds as souvenirs. In no time, we were back on the road. We made it to the Abbotts in the early evening. The local Baka kiddos wanted to greet the strange new fellow, but sadly, they didn't speak French, and I didn't know Baka. But they sure were cute. The next morning, I bid adieu to the Abbotts' peaceful patch of forest. Mr. Abbott dropped me off at the bus station, and I ate an omelet sandwich before catching a bus back to Yaoundé. People weren't the only passengers. These plantains were destined for the city market. This goat went on the roof, and there was also a chicken in a bag in the seat in front of me. Oh yeah, and there was a missing window too. After the engine died once, and being serenaded by the kid next to me, and being stopped by police and soldiers and handing my passport over twice, I made it back to Yaoundé safe and sound, with quite the story to tell. Some experiences are too amazing to pass up, and I have to thank my school director for reaching out to Mr. Abbott in the first place, on my behalf. Besides the Ngeke, this trip wasn't filled with crazy wildlife or dramatic African safaris, but I was just fine with that. It was still a quintessential African experience, filled with its fair share of wild stories. But more importantly, I thoroughly enjoyed hanging out with the locals in their element, on their time, and sharing their food and conversation in their beautiful neck of the woods. We were guests in their world, and that is something I will never take for granted. I also loved meeting the Abbotts and seeing where they do ministry. As Chloe and I continue to pursue global missions, I will remember their example of dedication and humility in serving the Baka people. Thank you, Abbotts, for your hospitality and ministry. In conclusion, I hope this video was exciting and entertaining, but I hope that it also gave an intriguing glimpse into a world quite different from many of our own. I hope that the beauty and diversity of our world can inspire us to appreciate God's majesty more and share the good news of His gospel wherever we might go. This video was about the Abbotts and Campbells in Cameroon. But who knows? Whenever and wherever, God might be calling you next.